Steve Moran here, and I want to start by wishing you all a happy New Year's. I, like all of you, am just I'm so glad to be kicking 2020 to the curb and starting into 2021. I say that recognizing that in our industry in particular, we're going to still have a rough few months, but the vaccine is here. I've talked to a number of you who have received the vaccine, who are about to receive the vaccine in your communities, and it really will be a game changer. But no matter how much better we start getting, we're going to have a rough couple of months, and I think it's going to take us some time to rebuild occupancy and to catch our breaths. But I'm glad that we sort of have that light at the end of the tunnel. I know it is unusual for us to be doing this video conversation on New Year's Day. It's a holiday for a lot of you. But this is a conversation that Fara and I have been talking about having for a number of months. And as we talked in the last couple of weeks about when the right time was to tell her story, we decided this was the right time to do it. We know there will be a bunch of you who are on live. There'll be some others who will be watching it during the week. So before I want to start with a story about you, Fara, before I'm going to start opening the conversation. So I've known Fara for, I don't know, 8 or 9 years, something like that. She was working for Blue Willow Systems doing business development, and she came to us and became a sponsoring partner at Senior Living Foresight. And we had very friendly conversations. But the time I really got to know her was the time I really got to understand her heart. She and I were both at a conference in Washington, D.C., and I've had some history of blood clots in my legs that have gone to my lungs, and I had one knee area that was really, really sore, and frankly, it hurt so bad I could hardly stand, and I was nervous, and I was all the way across the country from home, and I told Farah about it. She said, "You got to go to the hospital." I said, "Oh man, I got this. I don't want to go to the hospital." She said, "I'm going to take you to the hospital." She took me to the hospital, and she sat me with me in the emergency room for, I don't know, 6 hours. And we just talked and talked and talked. And we walked out of there being best buddies and best friends. And we stayed that way. And we're business colleagues, but more importantly, deep, deep affection for each other. And I noticed a few months ago, you sort of started disappearing. You were part of our weekly team calls, and you just weren't up to it. And I didn't press too hard. And then finally, we got on the phone one day, and you told me that you had this most terrible news. And I'm going to sort of let you talk about it from there.
Oh, thank you. That is a great memory of mine. You know, what I remember most too, and what I love about you, Steve, is how you live your mission to change senior living for the better. And, you know, I hear people talk a lot about wanting to live that mission, but I really see that your purpose and passion. And I remember that cocktail party at one of the events. You know, I can't remember the details, but what I can remember is how it made me feel to stand with you, and then you needed to sit down, and how others were uncomfortable with someone having concern, or I remember you saying to the group of people we were standing with, you know, I think there's something wrong. And I watched as they turned around and peeled away and decided to step away from that intimacy. And that for me is the moment in my nature to step forward and lean in. And I realized you were alone. And I think that memory is sort of my core nature, and my hope is will be with me till my last day. But as you said, COVID's been terrible, and this year of 2020, last year, we get to say now last year, you know, transformed so many of us. And my last flight for business was March 2nd out of New York City to come back to my home, which is Dallas, Fort Worth, where my lovely mom lives. And I have a beautiful, beloved husband, Donald McLaughlin. And he's preparing our taxes. I think I shared with you in March. And he said, Fara, he goes, you just don't have to work this hard anymore. And the doctor says she doesn't want you to travel. And of course, in March, we didn't know how long this thing was going to last. And I was very scared. I said, you know, I'm just 59 years old. What are you talking about? He used the word retire. And I know we don't like that word in seniors housing, right? Because we have so much research that tells us that's bad for the brain. And so I said, well, I remember calling you and you said, oh, you're never going to retire. My couple of my dear bestie girlfriend, Marcia Shapiro, and oh, you're never going to retire. But I started to put a plan in place beyond the plan I already had, which was to retire at 63. And I was jovial and happy about that. And one by one, my clients that I had currently didn't need me and they were fearful. And so I had this pause like we all did. And I also had a lot of joy. And my husband and I love our gardens. But it was around May of 2020 when my husband, the only person I was with, those 2 months up to that point, no other person, started to tell me things that he noticed around the house. And I have to this day no memory of those incidents, but I can remember his shock and surprise. And so as I listened and denied that his experience was his, because I said, well, I don't know, you must have done it. You must have left the water on in the kitchen. You must have put the mayonnaise in the pantry. And then as he started to recall an event around Thanksgiving of 2019, there was absolutely no memory of this event. And I then became afraid because it was the signals, right? And over 20 years of sitting in the back of the room with Teepa Snow and Dr. Gary Small from UCLA. See, I can remember, I have some good long-term memories. I knew that this wasn't normal for me, but I still didn't believe that there was anything really wrong. But I did call my doctor, and I have a wonderful team of women doctors, which I had read 10 years ago. Harvard said, if you've got women doctors, you're probably going to have a positive outcome. So I've really trusted them over the course of my healthcare, because I call the 50s the decade of all your parts come up for warranty, which is something my mother told me as I approached 50. And goodness knows, if you know me, I've had a lot of upgrades to my hardware in my body and, appendectomy and all these other things. But I didn't really think this was something other than maybe a vitamin. I cannot remember what my thought process was. But my doctor did take it seriously. And in May, we started a process where I had to wait till September, the day after Labor Day, to see this world-class diagnostic neurologist. So I'm grateful to that process because I immediately got into exceptional neurological care. And that started a sequence, as I have discussed with you, of intensive testing. And I did everything. I went through the tests and I did the tests. But along the path of the testing, there were things that shocked me. And they were related to mostly my short-term memory. But I call D-Day the day I got lost. I was driving myself, as most of us were in 2020. If we had to go somewhere, it was something of crucial importance. And I got lost that day to the neurologist. And I'd been to that office half a dozen times in that 6 weeks. I had the GPS on, but I couldn't watch the road and hear the voice and navigate. So I got lost. And then I got scared. I had buffeted enough time. I'd learned and adapted over the years to just keep giving myself more time, because this wasn't the first time I had been lost, but it was the first time I was truly frightened, because it was a part of Dallas that I'm a Fort Worth person. I went to high school in Fort Worth, Dallas. I went to college at TCU. I knew that I knew this part of town. I knew that I had been there before, but nothing looked familiar. And I became horribly frightened. So I pulled the car over to the side of the road, and I did what was the only thing I could think of, was just close my eyes, turn the car off. And a voice that many of you may know, Ken Clare, a beloved colleague of mine for 20 years that I started with in seniors housing at Sunrise Senior Living. His voice came to my mind because we drive all over California together when we worked together for Brookdale. And he'd say, Farah, the GPS knows where it's going. Always listen to it. And that was such a gift that thought came to my mind. And I turned the car on and I listened to that voice that I was doubting. And I was so frightened because the right turn, left turn, right turn, all those streets were totally foreign. I might as well have been in Moscow or, some other country. And then I saw when the GPS said your location is 500 feet, I looked up and I saw the building. And that's when I could see the sign and I knew I was where I needed to be. But that was the day that the neurologist said a dozen times, the tests are bad. And I heard, as I went into shock, bad, 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 bad. And I remember starting to bargain. And I said, isn't there anything good here? And she said, the only good here, Farah, is that you knew something was wrong. And so to share this with you and your audience, I think for me was the start of an epiphany that I had never really heard from other families or prospects or our residents. Maybe they come to us too late, as we often know. But to hear the doctor say over and over again, as I continue to be treated, I'm in a second opinion round at UT Southwestern. I did just receive a hard diagnosis of moderate cognitive impairment. So all of us know mild cognitive impairment, but moderate is because the daily function, there are things I cannot do anymore. I gave the keys that day to my husband. I cannot cook because I burn things. And I cannot give myself the, 20 medications 4 times a day that I need to take just to maintain my body anyway. I was missing them before and was a very cavalier. But this started a journey that I'd hoped I could convey to others.
Farah, let me stop you for a second. Can you tell us what the diagnosis was?
Well,
or is, I should say?
Right now, it's definitely early onset Alzheimer's. My neurologist continues to put in writing that because of the tests, I definitely have frontal lobe loss. So there's hard atrophy of the brain on both temporal lobes. And when you see these results, I'm not a neurologist, so I don't know really what I'm looking at, but she went through and was able to explain and then gave me everything. And I've certainly taken them to family. I have a dear beloved cousin that's a nationally recognized radiologist. And he said, I read MRIs all the time. And I can see the frontal lobe loss. I've only from this neurologist's findings and she weighs the brain through a number of PET scans. I only have 40% of my frontal lobe functioning, which is fascinating because I was known as a courageous person. But of course, we all know that controls impulses, it controls decision-making. And while I was brave from other people's perspective, as I've had to do histories, Steve, I've had to go back and back. And I think that, as they know, this started a long time ago. The interesting part about our work is that when I moved from, as most of you know, I'd come out of museum management. Even though I had had a healthcare career, I was at a science center, a Smithsonian affiliate in the Bay Area, where Elon Musk was one of our donors. And it was in Berkeley. It's in the Berkeley Hills. And that was very complex, very strategic. And the first day I started in senior living, and everybody was running around saying they had a move-in on Monday that was planned for Thursday, I knew in that moment this wasn't going to be like my previous specialty hospital where we had 15 admissions a day. And so the therapists have all said, the cognitive and speech, that I was sort of dialing it in for 20 years, that nothing was truly, I kept looking for Valhalla and Shangri-La. I kept asking leaders like Tiffany Tomaso or, and I can't remember now, so a name will fly out of my head, and that'll spiral me into anxiety. But I would say, send me to a market where there are no grandmas and grandpas, where there are no now people like me. And I never found a market, that was too difficult to conquer if we called people back, if we were with them and present, not showing off real estate, but present.
So talk to me a little bit about What's happened? So you got this diagnosis. So what's happening in your life right now, and where do you go from here? And I hope, can you see the comments on the right side of the screen there? I'm going to pop a few up so
I'm not looking at them.
Okay, well, I'm going to pop a
You
few
and
up
I
so
are
people can see them because you have so many fans who love you. And so while you're talking, I'm just going to put them up, but you can ignore them. They're just for everybody to kind of see, okay?
Thank you. And I want everyone to understand, because of my right temporal lobe loss senses, I have specialty hearing aids now. And so what it did is it took me on a journey of how do I find the best care and best treatment now in this moment in COVID. And I've done everything. I said, I'll hang from a chandelier. I'll stand on my head. Whatever they want to do, I'm doing. And so, I appreciate everyone understanding that for me to have a conversation with Steve, I have to see him, but it's hard for me to attend to any other information. And that's really what I found along my path. People know the last 2 years, I would order Ubers and, I was a Marriott Platinum Premier. They knew when I come through the door, everyone was taking my luggage and doing all these things for me that now we know cognitively I have to try to do for myself. So this year, when I couldn't handle senses, even as a passenger in a car, I would yelling at my husband, and I feel very badly for that because, of course, I thought it was him. And the therapists have said, no, you cannot wear noise canceling headphones. But I now have specialty artificial intelligence hearing aids that know to focus on a human voice. And if there's a garbage truck or some other sound, it will muffle that external sound so I can hear voices. And again, I didn't hear any of this. All the beautiful leaders that I've loved and respected, like Rochelle Blau, who's an internationally recognized leader out of Chicago. She certifies practitioners in, impairment training. Crystal Roberts, whom I was so privileged to work with at Sunrise, and she's at MBK. I sat with them and our teams and our families, but until it happened to me, I didn't really understand. And I regret that. And I want to say to everyone there, if we're in service to others, but also to yourself, we have to walk our talk. I wish that as an executive, I had planned more cognitive games. I had challenged myself. While I knew how to play bridge, I wasn't playing bridge. I wasn't dancing with my husband. I wasn't eating the Mediterranean diet. As many of you know, I've struggled with my weight for years. So I've been a fat girl and I'm a thinner girl now. But all of those principles we were doing for the other. We weren't really incorporating it into the us, because this is for all of us to grow and learn. So now the journey is to slow the progression. So I'm excited that they've given me this Alzheimer's diagnosis on top of the probable frontal temporal dementia. But I've started on Aricept and I've been able to tolerate it. So evidently, if you have a hard frontal temporal dementia, the Aricept will create more problems. And so I've been on the medication since the 23rd of December. And as the doctor said, there will be no light bulbs that go off, but it's supposed to slow the progression down. And that's my hope. If I can live with Alzheimer's and live a life of dignity and thrive, I will no longer have my career. As I've told you, this will be my sort of last day, my exit from LinkedIn. And it's too overwhelming for me to do any work anymore. I was able to take a beautiful last bow with the Washington State University's Granger Cobb Institute in 2020 when they asked me to build out their sales and marketing curriculum. And I did that in such a thoughtful way. I had 5 months to do it. And I actually asked and brought in a number of colleagues that I respect and have now handed as a relay those experts to Washington State University. And they complimented the caliber of the work and all the because I knew I had to reference everything. I was frightened, but I still didn't know that this was Alzheimer's. I just thought that I I kept saying, oh, I'm just getting old. And I would say that around you. And I remember you
You
saying,
would, yeah.
you're not that old. But I would say this a lot. So I would say, if people want clues, look at the adaptive behavior. I had adapted my language, my life. Many of you may have met me in a conference recently in the last 2 years. I had many people approach me and they would say, oh, I've missed you and I can't wait to, and I would say something. I'd say, tell me the last time we saw each other. So I'd turn the tables, right? And they'd say, oh, we saw you a year, and then I had no memory. I'd be searching for a name tag. I'd still have no memory. My hope is that I was always kind. I know many of the investors that I worked with knew that I was candid. I was brutally candid. But it was a language I felt just like my neurologist had to say, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. Sometimes we have to be candid. And so, along this journey, I'm not ever going to emerge from the MRI, so to speak. I'm being retested and retested and retested because now they're going to keep watching the progression. So I'm a bit of a guinea pig for my own doctors, and that's nice and good.
So do you have any kind of prognosis? Are they making any guesses in terms of the sort of the rate of decline in your cognition?
That's the interesting, like I'm talking with you now. So what I love about my neurologist, she was at UT Southwestern for over a decade, and she decided to create her own brain institute. All of my second opinion doctors know her. So as I see these mostly men at UT Southwestern, they respect her. And one of the things she said to me, and when she started me on Aricept, she goes, many of the people you will see along your journey in the world they are looking at such graphic disease. She goes, they will doubt as you walk and talk. And so I want to be able to sort of be a new face for this is what Alzheimer's looks like today. They don't know. So here's the most overpaid profession. Even meteorologists have better software. I mean, I do commend the neurologists. I do commend the field, and I want to make sure I'm clear. But to hear the doctors say there's 100 different forms and there continue to emerge of different dementias, and then the combination of them. So when all of us go to a book, or I've had to go to Google to look up what she's told me, this is every person's experience. I described to my mother to help her before I had a baby, before I got pregnant, before I went into labor. I had Lamaze classes. I read books. My husband was there. We all did that together. But until I had my birth experience, no one could have prepared me with a word or a training for what my personal subjective experience was. And that's kind of what's happening now as I look at and hear my doctors say, well, this can be a combination. So they have ruled out ALS. So it's like I did recently have some very extensive neuron testing, and it was like a Geneva Convention torture. It was electric needles into the actual nerve centers. And and the irony is, this doctor said to me, we tested you 5 years ago. And I said, I have no memory of that. The nurses, they all brought because I did have carpal tunnel 5 years ago. And evidently my doctor sent me there, no memory at all, even after this torture. So I am hopeful this because I have some long-term memory loss, that it's not the frontal temporal hard diagnosis, but nothing yet other than, yes, we have early onset and we're going to treat you. And all of us know as professionals, there is no treatment but Aricept, and then possibly Namenda. And then everything else is sort of spitballing. But I'm going to do it all. I'm doing every cognitive. I'm doing it all. Because the doctor then said, I'm doctor ordering you to have fun. You have to play. You have to have fun. You cannot be stressed out. I'm like, really? Fun? I didn't know that word.
Yeah. So Can you talk a little bit more with when you first, I talked to you, I think the day you got your hard diagnosis or the day after you got it. And, there were tears and there were tears on my side too, right? It was both sides. And I mean, it was a shock, right?
Horrible shock.
How did you cope with that? And how are you coming to peace with it now?
Thank you. I mean, I know that you were with me. I mean, I would say the first 3 weeks were horrible. And my beautiful son in San Francisco, Adam Gold, some of you know him, and he would often come with me as a young boy, very successful. He got in his car and drove 3 days straight and stayed, in Airbnbs to mitigate any exposure to COVID. And that was a moment he was here where we could take a little breath. We were so shocked. Adam went to the neurologist and she wasn't that patient. She said the same thing. I already told your mom. Instead of that day, the word wasn't bad. It was horrible. So I said, oh my goodness. So then I was sitting in horrible and bad for 3 weeks. And I do have a beloved psychotherapist, psychologist I work with and have for 8 years. So of course I'm on the phone with her. And she is a specialist in grief, PTSD, shock, death and dying. And she said, Fara, you are in shock. And I said, well, I have to move forward. So then I went into a place of huge fear. But I would say that within the period up to about 3 to 4 weeks ago, and I would say it emerged about December 1st after Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving was provocative enough around gratitude that I moved from shock, October 19th was my D-Day, shock, fear, anger, bargaining, to none of those things are going to get me anywhere, but make me miserable, make me more anxious. None of the medications they gave me for anxiety, taking it all away, didn't do anything. So my ability to do my own didactic cognitive behavioral Fara, just stay in gratitude for everything you have. I'm visual, so I have to have my family. If people are looking behind me, that's my beloved family, my ancestors, my mother, my children, my grandchildren. So I stepped into this beautiful light, and I am a woman of faith. Some of you know many faiths. I've celebrated a devout life as a Christian. I raised my children in the Jewish faith. I've studied with Buddhist priests. So I've had all of this beautiful reverence for God. And my faith, along with my gratitude, has taken me now to the place the doctor has ordered. We need you to not have any stress. It's going to cause more inflammation of your brain. So choosing to be afraid, choosing to be angry isn't going to get me anywhere. It's a great principle of all of our lives, right? But now I'm practicing it. It's a practice. It's never a destination.
So we're kind of coming up on time here. I sort of 2 more areas I want to talk about. I know that I've been watching all the comments, putting some of them up, and seeing the number of people who are on watching this. And I know there are going to be people who want to be helpful, who want to reach out and just personally say how much they love you. And yet I also know, and I've seen this before you, but you and I've also talked about how when people start reaching out to you at some point in time, instead of being helpful, it becomes its own burden. And so I don't know whether you want to talk about what they can do or whether you'd like me to talk about it, because we did talk about this before we went on the air. So
thank you, Steve. I mean, I think that people that I've struggled the most to support, because I can't support anyone else. Really, I can't even take care of myself fully. I can't take my own medications. I can't cook. I can't drive. But it's hard to explain all of this. So I ask people, if you love me, to go to the internet as much as you can. Today, a beautiful colleague of ours, Rob Liebrick, sent me some information that he's compiled with the Goodwin team and the Mayo Clinic. And I love the Mayo Clinic, and I really appreciate Cleveland Clinic and Harvard. Yale New Haven Hospital, where a number of my dear colleagues in Connecticut. But I need to let people know it is hard for me, because then it propels the emotional part. And I've had to say to some of my family, I cannot be responsible for how you choose to react. It makes me sad and that hurts me. And so I've asked my family, and I would say to you that my dear beloved friend, Marcia Shapiro, another dear friend in the Bay Area, Martha Bauman, are compiling a list, or not a list, they're compiling letters. So I've asked people if they do remember me and they know me, because the cognitive therapists want this, to have someone type, or typing's better because I can then really read it, but anything that you remember you want to share. I don't need any things. Please don't send any things, but I need help with my memory. So if you know or remember there's something about our time together that was memorable, whatever it is, and or a photo with it, they're compiling that. And so I know if people could send those to you, Steve,
Yep.
Marcia.
Yep.
I would say a gift has been my dear friendship with Gail Peacock, a colleague I know you know, but she's here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And one of the things she's done is treated me just the way she's always treated me, and fun, and asks me counsel. Fara, what would you do about this? Or Fara, what do you think about that? And it's professional in a way, but it's also more, it's just a friend. And then the presencing of my friends, Martha Bauman, Marcia Shapiro, I would say in particular, this presencing, I've never understood it till now. How to just be and not do. There's nothing anyone can do. I can't do anything. But if we can be together, even if it's just in a place of, the virtual coffee chat, and just to hear about your boat, Steve, and your precious granddaughter, that presencing is more precious to me right now than anything.
And the one other thing I would say is that if you reach out to Fara by email, or if you call her or text her, and she doesn't respond, don't take that personally, because it becomes so difficult when in that circumstance. I think one of the things that can be really hard in this conversation is that, we've talked here for just over half an hour now, and you don't seem any different hardly. But one of the things I do know that wouldn't be obvious is that you'll walk away from this exhausted. And
It's the only
that
thing on my calendar today. It's the only thing I will do today, other than the fun I had. I cannot talk to anyone else. My head, my frontal lobe starts to hurt. I mean, I do want to leave our colleagues with this. I'm walking my talk. And if many of you know, I made a conscious decision that my husband would be my husband. My children would be my children. And 21 years ago, I bought long-term care. I'm still in the process. It'll hopefully be approved by the end of January, but I have selected Maplewood Senior Living. And I know it sounds like an endorsement of them, and on a certain level it is, but many, many, many senior living companies are amazing. All of you are doing great work. For me, they were around the corner from my grandchildren. They provided my husband and I in Connecticut to be close to my sister, my only sibling, my blood relative, and my mother now is really being cared from my sister. But for me to be in a place where I can have walking trails that we talk about, all of my therapy brought to me, 24-hour dining is important to my husband and I, organic vegetarian menu, important to my husband and I, that all of those things. And then their clinical director, Brian Geiser, I hope I'm not messing up his name. He's a nurse practitioner, and he knows and has practiced in the clinical area out of Yale New Haven Hospital in his own practice. And now to know clinically that a team can allow me to live in assisted living until I'm a wander risk, and I'm wearing all this innovation I can. And then to know that I want to be moved to memory support where I am secure and my husband can then live his own life. I'm walking the talk, folks. And I can tell you, for me to live at home with my husband is the wrong thing. And COVID is still what's getting in our way. Once I'm vaccinated and I can move, but
Well,
community is community, and it is still the right thing to do.
I think that's a great way to close, Farah. Community is community. And as our friend Russell Rush talks about so much as he talks about selling senior living, is that ultimately what he sells, what he believes in, and what the data shows is living in community helps older people live healthier, longer, happier, more productive lives. And so I'm just, it just warms my heart. My heart breaks for you. I am so grateful for your friendship every day.
Thank you.
Thank you for being willing to be so transparent and vulnerable. Sort of as I was watching the comments come through, the one last thing I do want to say is I kind of think this ought to be required viewing for every student out there who's going into the senior living field, because you're talking about what the reality is. As somebody said, this is so much different than a textbook, and they're absolutely right. So any last words before we close?
Just love, when we're stripped down, when I've gone into the MRIs and I have no jewelry on, nothing but my body and myself, then I know that's all I'll ever take with me is the love that we've had between each other. And I know that it sounds metaphysical or sentimental, but I can only tell you right now, I know how you make me feel. And I know someone else coined that phrase, but I can't remember memories, but the sticky things now are the things that made me feel an emotion. And how much now, if I can look into your eyes and I don't see pity and I don't see fear, I've had to say to my mother, Mommy, you cannot look at me with fear. I need you to take your fear somewhere else because I need you to be my mom. Some of you saw Facebook where my mother sent me a life-size teddy bear. He's weighted because insomnia has been a huge part of the symptoms. So if I'm up at night, I literally get to cuddle this bear. And it means something to me and it makes me feel loved. So at the end of the day, that old adage, everyone with Alzheimer's and memory impairment knows how you make them feel.
Yeah.
Touch them, look at them, and just be present, whatever it is. And I remember many of our residents would have an inability to speak to me. But if I could touch their face or their shoulder or hold them, I now am learning that's all I need. And prayers. I believe in miracles. So if you guys can pray, I get 10, 15, 20 years and this Aricept Namenda, and by then they'll probably have some kind of vaccine for these plaques. Then life's good. I have 20 years my daddy didn't have. Many of you know my dad died of a sudden coronary event at the age of 40. So gratitude. So I'm grateful to all of you. Thank you for listening. I hope that I've been of support to all of you. I know at Maplewood, I've asked them to help me be purposeful, to help me talk to a family, because I just still want to make my life of purpose, of service. So if a family's struggling and people, as we all know here, wait, what are we waiting for? I've already wandered in a street. I've already gotten lost in my car. I've already burned meals. There is no more waiting for me. And so that's why I've chosen to walk my talk.
Farah, thank you very much. It's a privilege to be walking this with you. And thank you again for being willing to be so transparent with your friends and colleagues in this industry. And it's so cool to see the love that comes through here. So I'm going to end the broadcast now. Let's stay on for just a second. Yes. So don't go away. And for those of you who've been watching, thank you so much. Thank you for your kind words. Have a wonderful New Year's Day. I look forward to being able to see you later in the year at conferences. It's been a long year without that human physical touch.